Welcome to today's video, Titan Mobility. I used to be a hunter main for literally ever. One day we were trying to do some scrims. We always have too many hunters on the team. So I just decided, screw it. I'm going to try Titan. I've never played Titan before. Let's give it a shot. And I was trying to figure out, how much grenade energy do I need? How much melee energy? What do I want for my mobility? All that good stuff. So I decided to make a video on it because I figured out what I like most. And I thought I would share it with all of you guys. But without further ado, let's get right into it, shall we? All right, we have our good friend Captain here.
Thank you.
This is where we compare the slide between 0 mobility and 10 mobility. There are some other scenarios where I go all the way from 0 to 10, showing you every single tier of mobility. But for the slide, I was fairly certain that there was no impact when it came to mobility on how far you could slide. So I just told Captain, here's a spot where I want you to try and slide every single time as close as you can. We'll do it 10 times at 0, 10 times at 10. I color-coded all 10 runs. And then that way I could measure the median from when you started your slide to when you ended your slide and see if it makes any kind of a difference between 0 and 10. Here's a quick video just to show you what I mean. As you can see, he didn't start his slide at the exact same spot every single time, but it was actually pretty damn close. So props to you, Captain. And then same thing with 10 mobility. There was a little bit of a variance between where he started and as a result, where he would end up. But either way, they were actually almost identical. In fact, they would be identical because mobility clearly has no impact on slide. Okay, so next up, I thought, what do I do a lot as a Titan? I glide all the time. I never stay in one glide. I'm always kind of burst gliding low to the ground. Am I gliding further? Am I getting more boost? Like, what's going on here when I'm changing my mobility between 0 and 5, 7, 10, etc.? We did the same thing here. We picked a spot for him to jump for the first burst, the second burst, and then we measure where he lands. Here's the demonstration, and again, ran it 10 times. These are the results at 0 mobility. That first batch is where he was doing his jumps. The second batch is where he would do his first glide. So as you can see, you don't time it perfectly every time. It's not quite as tight there. And then his second glide obviously varied even more so. So again, this is why it becomes more and more important to do 10 runs of this. And then last but not least, where he would land. Here is 10 mobility. So he was jumping roughly at the exact same spot, pretty good. The first glide on 10 mobility was consistently ahead of where he was with 0 mobility. His second burst on 10 mobility was equally ahead of his second burst on 0 mobility. Like, the distance from his first burst on 10 compared to his first burst on 0 is the same as the distance between the second burst on 10 versus the second burst on 0. Not surprisingly, same distance difference there between the landings. So after this, I kind of realized, okay, I think the only difference here is the initial jump. Mobility has 0 impact on the glide. I wanted to be absolutely certain. So I actually came back another day, different helper this time.
Thank you, Kuda.
There's too much variability in using 2 bursts. Let's just try the same concept, but only 1 burst and just hold the glide the whole way there. Here's what I mean. So I did the same thing here. I marked where he did his first burst, and then I marked where he landed. And we swapped over to 10 mobility, did the exact same thing. Pretty well the same result here. 10 mobility was only slightly further, and that's just because of the initial jump. So now I'm going to explain exactly what's happening here. When you look at the trajectory of a projectile, it goes in an arch like this, and it has horizontal velocity. This is what's happening with our Titan, okay? So when we're jumping up, we're actually maintaining horizontal velocity throughout the whole thing. We're just changing how high we go, whether we go this high or that high or this high. That's all that's happening here. So what's going on is you're not necessarily going faster in a horizontal direction when you add mobility as your Titan. You're actually no faster at all. All you're doing is you're going higher. Your arc, instead of starting here when you're gliding, you're starting up here when you're gliding. So you're just being at a higher point. Now, obviously, if your arc is higher like this, you can wait a longer period of time before you decide to hit your burst and go at the same level. And as a result, you just end up being slightly more ahead. There's one cool thing that I did notice though while I was doing these tests. This jump reaches somewhere like right here. And then this jump, I think, reaches the crosshair. The cool thing is that on 10 mobility, not only does the jump go higher, but it actually reaches its maximum height at the exact same rate that the 0 mobility does. So when this Titan reaches this line, this Titan will have just reached this line. So it's not like you're going to a higher height, but at the same pace from a vertical standpoint. You're actually getting a vertical boost, like you're reaching that height faster, which is very good. So that actually does add some value. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean when it comes to shotgunning in just a second. Say you're in a gunfight and you're shooting someone with your thorn and then someone comes up behind you. I find a lot of the time, whether it's comp or scrims or whatever it is, I have to react very quickly. And with Hunter, my immediate reaction was always double jump backwards, like backpedal, right? And shotgun them and then pull out my primary and try and finish them from there. With Titan, same thing. My brain immediately thinks jump and turn around and try and get the shot off. Well, I've noticed that with too low of a mobility, I don't get that nice springy vertical boost right out the gate. So I want just enough mobility so I do get a bit of that boost when I jump and turn around. Here's exactly what I mean. Then I thought to myself, okay, I've got this feeling like I like 4, 5, 6, and 7, but I prefer 5 and 6. Now that I know for sure these things jump to different heights, but at the exact same rate, maybe I should put them side by side and see if there's any outliers, because I've noticed on Reddit with a lot of the cooldowns, there's random outliers. They're not always a linear increase from tier 0 to tier 10. So here you go. I'm going to show you all 10 right next to each other. While we were doing this, Kuda was explaining to me that he could barely tell the difference between one tier and another sometimes, and then other times he could notice a huge difference. So while I was putting this together, I made sure to have the exact same frame for the starting point, and then I would draw a line where the helmet ended up. And this is what it came out to be. He was right. Look at this. You got 0 and 1 that are almost identical. Then you got a slight jump to 2, a bigger jump to 3. 4 is almost identical to 3, and then another jump to 5, and then another jump to 6, but then 7 feels the same as 6. Then you go to 8, and there's this massive difference again, but to 9, then 10, very minor. So the point that I want to give here is that if you're trying to build that perfect build with these 6 gear stats, don't worry about how you need to have 6, or you need to have 7, or you need to have this. Like, some of these are so comparable anyways that you really shouldn't beat yourself up when it comes to mobility, at least from a jumping perspective on Titan. Next up, sprint. It's actually fairly well known that sprint is not impacted by mobility, but I thought since a lot of you might still be new to this game, I wanted to just show you the proof. I went on a map, I picked 2 exact lines on this bridge that I'm about to go across, and as soon as the frame crossed those 2 lines, those were my starting and ending points. Also, brand new to editing, I learned that editing software, you can add timers. So you're going to see a timer in the top right-hand corner. By the way, it's in seconds and then frames. I don't know why they would do this, but basically, if it says 1:30, that means 1 second and 30 frames. So 1.5 seconds, because this is always in 60 frames per second. Take a look.
WTF!
0 to 3 were all identical at 1 full second and 55 frames, which is 1.9 seconds. So I skipped all the way to 10 mobility just to show that, hey, even at 10, the sprint is exactly 1.92 seconds, or 1 second and 55 frames. Now, where the real magic happens is the walk. Why would I give a shit about walking,
Bruv?
Strafing, bruv. You walk much faster when you have higher mobility. Take a look. I'm going to show you 0 mobility. You've got 3 seconds. And then on 10 mobility, you've got just over 2 seconds. Now, you might be thinking, duh, idiot, when I look at my character, it shows me 4% increase per tier. So he probably fucking walks 4% faster every time you up the tier. 10 tiers, 40%, everybody's just having a great time. Well, guess what? As one of my favorite content creators, Fallout Plays, would say, Bungie loves to round numbers. So when you actually record these frame by frame by frame, which I did, and then you compare them, they don't increase your movement by 4% every time you go up to the next tier. They're actually more like 3 and change. They just round up to 4%. But from 0 all the way to 10, it ends up only being roughly a 30% difference. Everyone always talks about strafing, and it's true. It's probably the most valuable part about mobility. And I'm guessing most comparison videos out there show the strafing difference from 0 to 10 or something like that when they're not ADS'd. I'll do that so you can see it. I can't fit 10 of these on one screen because I'm not 200 IQ, so I just picked some, I threw it on there. This is going to show you a Titan going from one side to the other and back. I'll play it a couple of times. You can see the difference across the board. It does make a pretty noticeable impact. But then I'm going to show you ADS speed. This is what I really care about. When I'm in a gunfight, I'm usually aiming down the sights, so my lateral movement is a lot slower. So what I wanted to see was, how does my strafing compare across the mobilities when my gun is ADS'd? I decided not to show, 0, 1, 2. I picked 3 to 10 because I'll never run mobility less than 3 anyways. So I thought this would be more helpful for you as well. Same deal. I'll play it a couple of times, but this time I'm going to show you the numbers like I usually do. So we start off with 3 mobility, which is our base. 4 mobility goes 3 frames. And remember, each frame is roughly 16.7 milliseconds. So 3 frames gives us a 50 millisecond difference. That is the distance from the Titan starting on the right side, going all the way left, and then going all the way back to the right. You go up to 5. It's a pretty noticeable jump from 50 milliseconds to 117. 1 frame jump from 5 to 6. Another frame to 7. And then this is where things got kind of weird. I ran the test twice on mobility 8, 9, and 10 because I thought this didn't really make sense. Second time I ran it, it also didn't make sense. 9 was suddenly the fastest one. Oddly enough, I tried my absolute best to match it perfectly frame by frame. And these 3 were condensed to a point where I thought, okay, there's clearly not a linear 4% increase or 3.5% increase going on from 1 to 1 to 1. Or if there is, I can't even perfectly replicate it. So I don't really actually want to focus on that much. All I want to say is that there was definitely a jump from 5, 6, 7 up to 8, 9, 10. So if you decide that strafing speed is by far the most important thing in your gameplay, go ahead. You can definitely go for these things, even though I think there's drawbacks to the other aspects of a Titan that mobility has an impact on. One thing I'm going to do is go back to the picture and show you why I think it means even less. You see this distance from here to here? It's actually quite a bit. I truly don't believe that your opponent is going to be moving that much, especially if you're working on your aim and you're getting better at 3-tapping or taking 4 shots. In the time that you take 3 or 4 shots, they are not moving this far. Here's a picture of exactly where I did this. Go there for yourself, and you can make the decision as to whether or not you think you actually move that distance. But the reason I'm bringing this up is the fact that all of my numbers are relative to the distance that we're comparing it to. So the Titan has to go from this wall all the way to that wall and then all the way back. That's what my numbers are showing in a difference. If the strafing distance of your opponent is smaller, say from here to here, suddenly that gap gets shorter and shorter. So before, if it was 5, 6, 7 frames difference from one mobility number to another, it'll be even less if they're not strafing as much. I'll end it with this. There are 2 things that have always stuck with me that I heard. Number 1 is a guy named Vince, who's one of the absolute best Destiny players in the world. He once talked about how clever strafing is better than fast strafing. Most people just go AD, left, right, left, right, left, right. It's very predictable. He talked about it on stream one time on how you don't have to be the fastest strafer out there. If you can just strafe more clever, you might win your gunfight. Instead of going left, right, maybe you should go left, right, left. Number 2 is somebody that goes by the name of Aimer7, one of the most well-known people on Kovacs. He went into a great discussion one time about how strafing is actually, in theory, bad, because from a mathematical standpoint, it's going to decrease the likelihood of you reaching the fastest time to kill. If you were trying to hit targets while staying still versus trying to hit targets while strafing left and right, you'd probably do better 90% of the time when you were standing still. So his point was that yes, sometimes strafing is necessary to throw off your opponent in order to help you win your gunfight. But if it isn't even often that you're 3-tapping people with a hand cannon, for example, you probably need to focus more on your aim and less on the fact that you should be strafing at a faster speed. Okay, I know that was a lot of information, but there were a few things that really opened my eyes, so that's why I wanted to share all of it with you. For example, I think the sweet spot for my Titan is right around 5 mobility or 6 mobility. I think 4 and 7 are fine, but when I play with 5 and 6, that seems to be the sweet spot where it's just right for that first jump, and that just frees up stat space for other things like recovery or grenades or melee and all that good stuff. If there's anything that you think I missed or that you'd like me to look into further, please let me know in the comments. And then in general, if you're liking these videos, please do drop a like or just even let me know in the comments so I know if I'm doing a good job or if I should switch things up and do some things differently. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll catch you in my next video. Peace!